Welcome to the Coast Podcast. I'm Emilie, a virtual assistant agency owner who left Amazon in 2019 to build my dream.
And I'm Whitney, a freelance writer and communications consultant who never felt at home in a cube farm.
We didn't see many people paving their own ways like we decided to, so we created this podcast to talk to others who were brave enough to pick a different path. Creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing their careers and their lives their way.
Join us as we learn from them, get inspired, and show you beautiful paths less traveled.
Not every road leads to the coast, but the ones that do come with a great view.
Hello and welcome back to the Coast. I am Whitney Popa and I own a communications consultancy in Edmonds, Washington.
My name's Emilie Given and I own a virtual assistant agency in Lynnwood, Washington, just down the street-ish from Whitney. We decided to start this podcast because we met each other on the interwebs, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we wanted to start interviewing other, mainly women, some men, entrepreneurs about their journey and how their path looks different from the typical corporate model. I met Whitney in a Facebook group, Edmonds Moms. I posted about my new business. It must have been July 2019. And she commented that she really liked my branding, my website, and I was so flattered. So I reached out to her, just starting out, and, she mentioned that she could help with PR and social, and so we chatted a little bit about that, and at the time I wasn't ready to jump into it or didn't have the funds necessarily. So I won't say we kept in touch. We didn't really keep in touch. I mean, not really, but then I was working a project in Edmonds with this co-working space, Workhorse HQ. They had reached out to me to help with some marketing in their opening party. And they said, oh, there's this other local mom from Edmonds named Whitney. And I was like, oh, I bet it's her. And so I reached out to her on Instagram and it was her. So we met for coffee and to discuss the project, obviously. But then we kind of never, ever were apart again.
Yeah, our origin story, it's a meet cute, kind of.
It is a meet cute for sure. And I didn't realize, Whitney and I don't talk, we don't meet frequently, right? We don't hang out in person frequently, but we text each other every single day. And she...
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, she's one of my best friends, which is crazy. But...
Likewise.
Whitney, tell us about... we know about your PR consultancy, but tell us a little bit more about you and where you started. Where did your journey start?
It's a beautiful story. When I was in college, I started off majoring in biology. My grandfather is a periodontist. He's 92, and he actually just retired last year and sold his practice. And I thought what he did was so cool, and I wanted to work with teeth too. I was in his office one time as he had this lady completely numb, and he was extracting a dead tooth in her.
Ew.
And I was like, wow, that's so cool. And I was super into bio. I loved dissecting animals. I remember in high school, the janitor found a muskrat or some crazy rodent out on the football field and brought it in to our AP bio class to dissect, and I was so in it. I just loved all that gross stuff. And then I took Chem 111, which was a huge lecture class, and you broke out into labs once a week in college, and I hated it. And I was like, I can't go down the science route. This long term just isn't going to work for me. And I have no interest in calculus, physics, any of that stuff. And even Papa said like he almost failed organic chemistry a few times and had to get a tutor. And I decided I was going to major in things that I liked, and that was it. Like it was just I was interested for whatever reason in political science and English. So I thought maybe I'll be a lawyer, and I started pursuing those two degrees. And when I graduated and we had decided we're moving from Idaho, I went to University of Idaho to Seattle. Then I changed my mind because all the kids in my poli sci classes were so boring. All they talked about was basically it was like watching C-SPAN, and I was like, well, there's not enough creativity for me down this path, and especially if I have to deal with people like this all the time, then I don't want to do that either. So maybe I'll be a magazine editor and I'll that seems really sexy. So we moved to Seattle and I started applying for unpaid internships, and my North Star was Seattle Magazine. And so I started interning there. Um, and it was a 6-month internship. I rode the bus from our house in Wallingford downtown. And since they didn't pay me, I had to get another job, which
Yeah.
was teaching the SAT, standardized test skills on the east side. So I was not rolling in any kind of money. My parents helped me a little bit with rent, but I was working 6 days a week, and we kind of had a conversation of like, this is basically continuing education for you, this unpaid internship. And I was working so hard, doing the internship 5 days a week, and then in the afternoons I'd ride the bus from downtown Seattle to Kirkland to teach my students, and then back home at night. And then I, on Saturdays, also taught. So my roommates would be waking up with hangovers from going out the night before. It was either Saturday, I think it was Sundays, doesn't matter. And I would be so jealous that I didn't get to go and party with them and do like fun 20 something stuff. I did not have like a regular job. I had these two hard, low paying jobs. And the cool thing about working both of them at the same time was the English skills that I learned to teach grammar to the SAT was more than I'd ever learned in any school situation ever. So it
Right.
was actually more helpful to have all of those skills in what I do now than anything that I ever learned in school. So that was kind of bewildering of like, how did I go through like not even learning like the proper syntax for all these different sentences. And I spent a lot of time reading on the bus, and I would get books from the library and sit there and like correct them in my head. So reading actually got less fun because I had all these new skills, and I was editing all these books as I was sitting on the bus for hours every day. Then while I was interning, I realized that all of the stories that we were writing were based on press releases. So somebody would send us a press release and we would write the story based on that for the most part. There was some mining on our end, like knowing that there was a story to be told, or I remember pitching a little blurb on forks because they were getting a lot of tourism based on the
Right.
Twilight books,
Mm-hmm.
and having that picked up and run in the magazine with a little byline by me, which was so exciting. But for the most part, we were writing short stories based on press releases. And so I started investigating that route. Like, the story doesn't start here. And after my internship was over, I started investigating the PR route. And I know that a lot of other people in the world, like their schools have a PR program, especially
Mm-hmm.
places like U of O, WSU. They have a great media program. That was not how it was at Idaho. So that's, I always kind of got bougie about it too. Like English is better. It's not necessarily, but the mindset that I had is English is better because I can write anything versus just getting an advertising degree and writing that particular way or thinking that way. So my mindset was more of like, I'm going to get this degree in professional writing and use that in a more bigger general way. and figure out how to apply it. It was always like, I'm just going to pursue things that I like and I'll figure it out along the way. So my PR career started with a lot of these ahas that other people didn't necessarily have because they may have known that that's what they wanted, or their schools did a better job of having programs that suited them. But I kind of took that whole road after college, and then I got on the path of like the beginning of social media. They had me as the intern at my first PR internship, the one where I was at with Ashley, who we just had
Yep.
on the podcast. They had me running client Twitter accounts in 2019, or not 2019, 2009,
So Twitter
when
was relatively
all of,
new
oh
ish.
yeah, brand new.
Yeah. Yeah.
So nobody knew what they were doing. And so they would give it to the intern. And there's still a little bit of that now, but there definitely are a lot of social media managers. It's very much like now that's something that I think people can get degrees in, which is
Mm-hmm.
crazy. But even in school, I my sorority sisters gave me this, we had these fake degrees that we would give to each other as part of like a funny ceremony that we did. And I got a fake degree in Facebook because I was so like on Facebook all the time. And I actually emailed Mark Zuckerberg requesting to bring it to University of Idaho before it was rolled out there. And so
Oh, really?
everybody, yeah, kind of made fun of me about that. And it was just this thing that I was really interested in. And so my path in PR even started with that dual concentration that not everybody has now. They've kind of segmented them, at least at
Mm-hmm.
bigger companies, where you're doing PR, you're doing social media. But for me, I always did both. And I loved it because it forced me to be concise, the social media part of it, which I was not good at, given that I was like this flowery prose writer and took all these literature classes and thought very highly of myself. And the the PR part was great too because I got to learn about all these really awesome brands. I always had, for the most part, clients, or the clients that I was on teams for were always like outwardly sexy to other people. So Xbox, Nordstrom, all of those things. I wasn't necessarily always happy in those roles, but I knew that I had to work on behalf of something that I understood and personally thought at least was cool, even if I'm not like a big gamer. I did have a very strong relationship with Mario Kart growing up, so I understand why people love video games.
Right.
And they also wanted people like me because they wanted to be able to capture people like me. It's easy to get like the core gamers, they call them, but more casual mom type when they were launching Connect and more of the body movement stuff. They wanted to capture people like me. So my first big job working for Xbox, I was there about 4 years at Edelman, which is a big PR agency, after my time with Ashley at the smaller boutique agency in Ballard. And then I went to Nordstrom after I was at Xbox. And it was more, I always thought of my career of like these, I mapped it out of like, this is what I want. So I wanted to be at a big agency and understand that life. And then I wanted to go in house. But I also kind of tweaked that list to be like, I want to represent one brand. And at an agency, you're moved around a ton. I wanted to represent one brand and be the client versus having to respond to the client in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
the night. And I wanted to have it be something that I loved, because if it was my only concentration, then it couldn't just be like, I'm going in house at Nintendo or whatever. That wouldn't have been fun for me.
Right.
At that time, too, I also, sometimes there's like a sense of like a natural ending to a relationship as well. And
Mm-hmm.
my I was at the agency when my dad was going through his brain cancer, and the way they treated me in the situation was really eye-opening for me as well. And it was kind of the kick in the pants I needed to really be like, okay, I'm going to start interviewing and find the perfect next job for me. And that took about a year of I was just talking to my husband about it this morning, like first dates, basically, which is exhausting. So if anybody's out there interviewing, like I feel for you. It took me a year to get out of Edelman and into Nordstrom, which I had been applying to since I moved to Seattle because why not? I mean, I was like, Nordstrom, that would be great. That would be great. Um, the role that I had there was like pretty much the culmination of everything that I'd done before, and I really loved it. So I did PR for the Nordstrom Rack. I was on the marketing team and we did a lot of new store opening PR. So I got media trained. I was on the ground at the openings at like 4 a.m. in South Carolina talking to this reporter about how Nordstrom Rack coming is going to help the economy, give more jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I would walk around while I was media training. We were living in Queen Anne at the time, and I would walk the neighborhood and like repeat all the answers to myself of the questions that they might ask so that I wouldn't sound like a robot when they did ask them. And it was probably the most brutal and rewarding thing I did in my career because we would get recorded and watch ourselves back on camera and hear how we sounded. Even now, whenever I say which is one of my filler words, I am so conscious of it because I spent so much time watching myself back and honing my skills of speaking in front of a camera. And then I wasn't very happy at Nordstrom because the culture wasn't really a great fit for me. It's very old school. It's very button seat. The nature of my job was I was traveling, I was able to do things on the fly, but they still wanted to see your butt in the chair 9 to 5 every single day. And I didn't understand that. So it was this battle with myself of like, I love what I do, but I can't do it within, like Ashley had said, like within this container.
Right.
It was suffocating for me. So then one of my former bosses from Edelman, who's become a mentor, reached out to me about a startup that was in Pike Place Market, and they did cooking content called Chef Steps. And they, at the time, were making a ton of really awesome videos. They had come out of writing a series of books called Modern Cuisine, which was very like sciencey deep dives into just the most incredible food you've ever had in your life. And they had made that into a video series. And they had this whole small team that they were building and they needed a social media manager. So I went there, and they were moving at that time too into creating their first product, which has been out now for a few years, called Jewel. It's a sous vide device. And they laid me off after 10 months. It was the best cultural fit ever because there were so many brilliant people, and I was excited and inspired to go in every day and learn from them. I thought they were so cool. The chefs, I would stand behind them and use my media training to help them on camera, give them feedback on the go, and have it be like very fun and normal because they were the younger ones and I was more at their
Mm-hmm.
level. So they really respected my advice. And then I would also shadow the writers and work together with them on coming up with captions. There was an incredible videographer, photographer. So everybody was just so good. And I was glad to be a part of it. And then one day, kind of in the way they talk about startups, you know, all over the place, the CEO was just like, blah, and came in this big store, been laid off like, I don't know, half a dozen of us. And one day we got walked out. I got an Uber home, bawling my face off because it
Did
was
you
my
get a
one big
severance?
fear. Yes, but I had to sign a thing that said I wouldn't talk poorly of them
Hmm.
too in order
Yeah.
to get that. Like I wouldn't write on Glassdoor or whatever that it was like a bad experience. And it wasn't, but there was definitely some emotional instability from the leadership. I'll just
Right.
put it that way. And it was a crazy time because it felt like, okay, maybe this is the time when I can create something where I can go out and make my own way by freelancing. The mentor who brought me into Chef Steps at the time, he was a big freelancer writing speeches for people, including like Ben Affleck, to give to these charitable organizations. And I was like, how cool is that? Like, I want to write at that level. And my ego got in the way because I wanted to know that I was hireable. I wanted other companies to want me because I had had this career of like very outwardly sexy jobs with increasing pay levels along the way and good benefits and all these things. And I had to prove it to myself that I was hireable again. So I took 6 months to find another job and nobody wanted me. It was just kind of demoralizing.
What'd you
So
do in the 6 months?
lived on unemployment,
Oh.
tried to make a baby, figured out that there was a community acupuncture place down the street from our house that I would walk to. And it was a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I could just give them between $20 or $40, depending on how I felt, and get acupuncture. So I
Was that
hung
near Lake
out,
City?
yeah, in
My friend
Northgate.
Molly went there when she was trying to get
Yeah,
pregnant. That's so funny. Yeah.
it's
I heard it's great.
awesome. Yeah, they helped me a ton. And ever since then, I've always gone to the acupuncturist. I actually have an appointment tomorrow and I just unload everything. Like, I've been stressed out. I have this weird pain in my wrist or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I think they can't help, I just give them all the information. Just dump it all. I'm like,
Yeah.
do whatever you can for this. But I started there too. I had two goals: seasonal allergies. My allergies were really bad that year that I got laid off. So I wanted to go in for the whiskers, have them help me cure my allergies, which they did, and I've never even had them since. So I'm so crunchy about all of that stuff. And fertility. So we were working on getting pregnant, and like we talked about with Noemi, I didn't know much about my hormones or what my body was doing as it was coming off of birth control. So that added support was really helpful during that time because I had so much weighing on my mind. And I was like, it was my 30th birthday. And I remember I wanted to go to Canlis, and which is the fanciest,
I
uh,
love Canlis.
it, yeah, like big institution restaurant in Seattle. And I wanted to invite my grandparents and my mom and Roz and have it be like this moment of like, wow, it's your next decade. And 30 just felt really pivotal to me. And on the morning of my 30th birthday, I was laying on the floor, just having a panic attack, basically. My face felt really hot, so I wanted to cool it down. I had woken up, my grandparents were staying at our house, and they are just the most extra of extra people, especially outside of their environment. And they're very endearing, but exhausting. And they had been sitting there reading the back of our granola bars or something. They're like, Whitney, these are not gluten free. And they're always self diagnosing with things. And I just walked right past them into my bedroom, laid on the floor, took some deep breaths. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I am unemployed and barren and 30.
Oh
And this
no.
is like the worst, and not how I thought my life would be when I was 30. On my birthday, too, I also had an appointment that I didn't tell them about because I didn't care to have any feedback or questions, which was one of the, I can't remember what it's called. It starts with an H, but where they put dye through your tubes and see if your tubes are clogged. And it had been a little over a year since we'd been trying to be pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in to get that appointment done so that the tubes could be clear for sperms to come up and fertilize. And by the end of the month, I had a job at Amazon covering for somebody else's maternity leave that just kind of came out of nowhere through a freelancing site that I was through. Not freelancing, but contract jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, and they're amazing. 24/7 is, it's a creative agency or an agency for creatives to find contract work.
Hmm.
And I had had a friend who got her job at Starbucks through them, so I signed up, and they would randomly send me things. And so it just, sometimes when it's meant to be, it just works out. Like it ends up being like their you're not even being interviewed. They're just kind of like, when can you start? We love your background. And that's kind of how that was. And so by the end of the month, I had that job, and I was pregnant. I found out on the day that I started my job at Amazon that I was pregnant and had to take an Uber back up to the hospital. I'd had a blood test in the morning, and they made me come before I went to work. And then they called me back to say that my levels were really high and they needed to check to see if I was pregnant with multiples. So that's where
I'm
it
not
got
laughing.
really kind of, yeah, no, it was, and I am terrified of having multiples. So because my dad was a twin and I was just convinced that I would have twins. And so it like started off this whole, like, that's where it got even fuzzier for me of like, how am I going to be a mom and do all this shit? Like,
Hmm.
I can't figure out how this is manageable for anybody. And I got really paranoid during my time at Amazon of like, I need a real job. I need something that's longer than 6 months. My contract there was 6 months. The way that they kind of treated me as an inside outsider when you're a contract worker, it's just a very strange way of living. They kept saying they were hiring like crazy, tell your friends, but they wouldn't
Offer you
hire
the job.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very odd. And I met with the recruiter, even I had to reach out to her, and she was like, yeah, we think you're like this super junior level. When I had over 10 years of experience at that point, it was just kind of this bizarre thing. So I started applying to jobs again, got my job at Jean Juarez, which was my last corporate job. And I was getting bigger every day, hiding my pregnancy. And when I finally told them and met with HR, they basically were like, you get 6 weeks for vaginal, 8 weeks for C-section. And I said, what if that doesn't work for me? At the same time, we were going around to different daycares in the area,
Right.
and all of them had more time off than we did. We had no parent support. My mom was off flying around the world all the time. Roz's parents were in Oregon. Nobody lived nearby. We didn't really have resources. And it just became this thing that was like, there's no way I can manage an infant that I'm giving to a childcare provider for more than half my salary at that point, who has
Hmm.
more days off than I do, and killing myself to drive an hour each way. And I get that this is like, I had come from a point of privilege where I even had an option. But that's when people ask me to coffee because they want to quit their corporate careers, that's like the first thing I say of like, even all of during those past times, I would have little client projects on the side where I would dip my toe in and see, this is something I could do. People do need me, whether it was for social media, script writing, anything. So that's when I really started thinking seriously about it. And I had that corporate job. And then I started pursuing other clients on the side to see what was possible and start
Yep.
really building up my my confidence, honestly, not even like my roster of clients, but my confidence in finding people who would hire me. And then out of the blue, when I was hugely pregnant, I got an email or a text. It was a text from one of my best friends who was in my wedding, and his now husband worked at Sur La Table, and they needed somebody to help with their social media and influencers. And it needed to be somebody who had an LLC. And they brought me in hugely pregnant. I said, I'm going to have this baby, but I want to help you. And it was another instance of them basically trying to sell me on the job. And I started with them in July, 2 months, like a month and a half after my son was born. So this summer will be 5 years. I kind of count by how old he is
Yeah.
of owning my own company. And it all started. I had secured another small client from Craigslist, which is one of my favorite places to be. But with those two clients, I was like, okay, I'm like a little business now. And I felt like I can decide to not go back to Jean Juarez. And then I, you know, soften the blow of that by bringing my child in to be like, oh, look at the baby. Also, I'm not coming back. And my boss was like, go home and think about that. And then let me know. And I was like, I've been like thinking about
I've
this
been
for this.
thinking about it for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was awkward but it all worked out, and I do not work with Jean Juarez anymore. I do still frequent Jean Juarez, but yeah, I'm not going to be driving over to Factoria to work at their home office anytime soon. And I've kind of honed my client base by being like that same mentality that we talked about with Ashley of like, do I love this product or service and these people? They understand my life. Then let's have more conversations and figure out how we can help each other. And it's just been really, really cool. And I've been able to really figure out something that works for me to feel fulfilled, and use my brain while also having more flexibility for my family. And I wish, I don't have any regrets, but I wish I had known I could have done it earlier, before kids even.
Yeah. I think I think a lot of people, I mean, I wish I would have known that earlier too, but I mean, wouldn't you say that the experience that you gained has helped you become more successful now?
Oh, yeah, and the connections too. I mean,
Right.
the way that I get business often, and at least at the beginning of my business, was surprisingly through friends of friends. Like that
Mm,
text that came from my friend whose boyfriend at the time had a need, and I don't even know how he knew because I'd had like maybe one or two conversations with him ever, and he thought of me to help them. All of that, like just sprinkling it out into the universe a little bit,
hmm
is huge, especially in how I attract clients, which is also something that I had to learn along the way.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, you just said sprinkling it into the universe. And if you've heard our podcast before, you guys know that Whitney and I are pretty into the woo. And we're both really big on manifesting. But tell me what your philosophy is on that. Like, what, when you want something, or when you have a dream or a goal in mind, like what are your steps? What do you do?
That's a great question. It's, I feel it in my body first, very like, this is magical and I need to figure out how to make it happen. And I've, in 2020, when my client load was really impacted by everybody shutting down, I had a lot of time to start exploring other interests, and I kept hearing about human design in all sorts of different pings. Right now it's the Akashic record, so I'm going to dig into that soon. But with human design, you had actually mentioned it one of the first times I heard it, and I got really interested in it and pulled up my chart, and all those things like enneagrams never resonated with me, astrology a little bit. um, there's so much that I think is out there, that especially with like Myers-Briggs, all the like how you operate in a professional sense, or let's profile you as a person type of stuff, like never totally resonated with me, but this did, because it told me you are meant to move quickly and go with your gut. People should ask you yes or no questions so you can just drop into your gut immediately. But what I learned, I investigated, I pulled my free profile, which you can do a lot of different places. My favorite person is Erin Claire Jones, and I think you introduced me to her. And she has a really big following on Instagram now. She offers a blueprint, so you can do a lot of work on your own. Like all you do is give them like where you were born, what time, and the date, and all this crazy like physics and astrology comes together. I don't need to explain it because it's, to me, kind of unexplainable, and we are having an expert come and talk to us more about it. But what it did was give me kind of the language to describe myself in these ways. Like I kept feeling like, why do I always want to quit my job? Why, what's wrong with me where like I can't stay loyal, quote unquote, or I get so bored and I need to do something else. And this this profile told me so much about myself. So then I bought from her my blueprint, she calls it, which is like a 30-page document all about you and how you operate within the world, within business, etc. And what it told me is a manifesting generator. I'm somebody who moves quickly. I manifest quickly, so I see something that I want and I figure out how to get it. And a lot of people who are more methodical, like my husband, they're not going to understand that like I skip steps and I still get the same end result. And it can frustrate people because I'm always moving, especially when I'm lit up by something. And you can even tell right now, like I'm more lit up talking about this because it's something that's completely changed the way, not like, well, yeah, my life, but mostly my business, because I was able to figure out, like, in that time of freaking out about like the first year of my business, having that big client, I made more money than I'd ever made before. And I really always had to have like my ego always needed like you're a performer and this is what how you're rewarded for performing, whether it's through like the sexy job or the paycheck. And when that was impacted and I was running my own shop and I'd never really had to market myself before or find new clients because they always found me, I had to figure out like what is my strategy. And that's part of what human design does really well is it gives you the language to understand yourself, and then for me gave me permission to not send those cold emails. My background is in writing, PR. I'm a good writer. So I sent hundreds of these emails to companies of like, I could help you out. I really love you. I'm a true fan. And no one even replied. So once I figured out my strategy is responding or putting it out in the universe and saying like,
Magnetizing. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
here are the types of clients I want to work for next year, and just saying that. Or I remember when I started my business, like in hindsight, like I mentioned something on Facebook or LinkedIn like, hey, I just started off on my own. If you have anybody who needs help in these areas, let me know. And I got a ton of people reaching out to me. And I also got a huge handful of clients from a Facebook group in Seattle where a person who had been very big in doing social media for small businesses in Seattle was becoming a hypnotist, and she needed people to refer client inquiries to. And so I think I have a couple, at least three of my current clients were referrals from her.
Oh,
So
that's super
she,
cool.
yeah, so I replied to her inquiry on that Facebook group and said, "Hey, here's something about me." So the example there is like I have to be responding to something that already exists. If I put out a post promoting myself on a group like that, then it might not resonate with people. I probably wouldn't get anything out of it. It's kind of a no skin off my nose sort of thing if I wanted to try it. But my strategy is more of like replying to those things that already exist versus selling myself in a masculine way.
Mm-hmm.
It's about sharing my work and saying, hey, I worked on this really cool project. And then somebody sees that at some point, and months later, they're like, hey, I remember you did that thing for that person. I have a friend who's starting this company. Would you be able to help her too? So it's all about like feeling what feels right for me and sharing about my work in a way that is organic versus looking somebody up on LinkedIn and finding their email and reaching out to them and saying, this is what I do. Whereas for a different type of profile like yours, that
Right.
works,
That does. Yeah.
but it does not work for me. And knowing that is so freeing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's saved me a ton of time. And
And
then,
rejection. Yeah. Like,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, and made me more money, honestly.
So when you're saying that you say it out loud in like the universe, basically you're manifesting, right? So you have talked to me before about like signs. You're the really first person that got me interested in signs because of, I think you told me about that book,
Mm-hmm.
Signs by Laura Lynn Jackson.
Yeah.
Um, do you like talk to me about, do you still see signs all the time? Are you is that something that you hold a lot of weight to in regards to spirituality?
Not exactly. I always have been very tapped into my intuition, and there have been a lot of times in my life where I've resisted it because I wasn't always able to explain it. Where it's like, I have this feeling, but I can't tell you why. Even like, we're touring schools for our son, and it's like, this school is fine, but I just don't feel it. That's reason enough. Or walking into our current house and knowing, like, we're going to live here. There, it's like the tingly feeling. The thing with what I love about Laura Lynn Jackson's books is that she teaches you to look for specific signs. So if I need an answer from my dad, I'll come up with a sign, like the first thing that comes to my mind, and I'll say, if this is meant to be, then show me a sunflower. And in the fall right now, sunflowers, where we're at in the fall, wouldn't be as prevalent. So to see one right now would be more rare, and I would really trust that sign. Whereas just asking for a sign doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really give your guides, your people. And also, like, my dad is not a great person to be giving me signs because he likes to fuck with me, honestly. So he would be stubborn and just like not send me a sign. When I was trying to get pregnant, I talked to him a lot, and he really messed with me, and I could tell thought it was hilarious. But as far as like my overall guides, they do a good job. I've been told recently that they at least I think I had my aha moment that they were trying to download into me, but I need to take more time for stillness to listen to the downloads that they're trying to get to me right now. And I
It's the
feel
hardest
like,
part.
yeah, uh, I've had a lot of noise in my life lately, and I think I've been wanting to have a lot of noise because I haven't wanted to listen and really like be still. And so the signs stuff is always there, but not always as big as I'd like it to be if I gave myself a little bit more time. And honestly, I think I'm resistant and a little bit scared of like what if they say I don't things that I don't want to hear? What if the signs point in a direction I don't want them to? Because again, I'm like a manifesting generator. I'm like, nope, I want this, and we're going to make it happen. And I don't care what anybody else says. I don't always want to sit with the thoughts, the feelings, the signs that come up. So when I proactively ask, yes, um, they show up for me. My team does, not necessarily if I ask my dad, but I like to have a more tangible person to ask versus just like, oh, I have a team of spirit guides or whatever. That's not as helpful for me as being like, okay, dad, show me this. And if I say like within 24 hours or sooner to give them something to work with, if I ask for him as an example to explain that, he would take 2 days, and he would show it to me, but on his time, you know?
Right.
So when I ask my like team in a broader sense, then they really show up for me. But if I decide to ask my dad, I have to know that he's going to fuck with me.
I'm glad that, I mean, I know your dad. Are you comfortable talking about your dad?
Yeah.
I know your dad is like so important to you, and like we've never really talked about it, but I've heard you talk about him, and I can tell that it's a very deep um subject for you. So like if you want, talk about your dad and like how he impacted your life, and um like I want to hear about the wonderful dad that you had, because I know that he so is important to you, and I can tell in the little ways you bring him up, or the letter you write to him on your blog, like. But I've never really asked you, like, talk about your dad. And if it's too much, like that's okay, but I
No,
feel
it's
like I
just
should ask.
emotional. Yeah. I don't know. He's like the best person I ever knew. So for me, I know that everybody is complicated and layered, and I don't have him like on this like pedestal as like a god because he wasn't. He was human, but he just was like he had two daughters and a wife and a lot of pets and a lot of feminine energy around him, and he was probably like the best male communicator I've ever encountered because he was like willing to talk about feelings. He grew up in northern Idaho on like a lot of property for a lot of his childhood with four siblings, and he would braid my hair and tell me like, remember, I can only do this because I used to braid horses tails. It's like a jokingly like I'm still masculine thing, but he wore pink shirts that said like Whitney's daddy embroidered on them too, so like
Oh,
he was
that's
not,
so cute.
yeah, he was like not trying to, be super masculine, but he was like a country boy who had this cool career working in Parks and Rec. He got a master's degree in Parks and Rec from U of O. He went to Idaho like I did. I graduated from college on his birthday. And we were just really, really close. I mean, when we moved to Idaho when I was in high school, and I hated my life because we had lived in like the hippiest town of Olympia and then moved to very conservative southern Idaho, and I hated both of my parents for doing that to me. I still hung out with them constantly because I had no friends and I liked them. So we were just like really close in a not like codependent way, like just always kind of near each other. And he just always, all he ever cared about was that like I did things that he was always proud of me for being who I was. Like he never tried to steer me in a certain direction of like this is what you should want or this is what you should do. It was just like he was stubborn and methodical and anal retentive like all hell, but he, when it came to me, was just like I want you to just do things that make you proud and that'll make me proud. So I never questioned like when I started my own company, like thinking like, oh, is he up somewhere wherever he is, like being proud of me or not. He never worried about me that way. He just always was there. He was the steadiest person for me. Like I would come home wherever they were living and he would have spaghetti waiting for me every single time. It was just like the most comfortable home base for me. He's also a Taurus, which is a very steady sign. And my best friend is a Taurus as well. So, like, there's a lot of comfort I get in each of them knowing that they are going to be like, I always call her and I called him like my level head, where it's like, I'm going to have this freak out about something small in your direction. And then you're going to help me, you're going to talk me down from this. And I'm not always going to like it. So I don't always reach out to you about these things because I don't want to hear your level headed perspective. But when I want it, like, I know where to find it. So to not like, my mom was always like, she had a lot to prove because she was so pretty growing up. And she had a lot of teachers who always told her, like, you're pretty, you're just going to marry well, you're not going to be anything. So she always worked her ass off to prove herself otherwise because she'd ingrained this belief in herself of like everybody told me like I can't be pretty and smart basically. So she was traveling a ton my whole life and very like in this whole like I have to be a career woman mode. And my dad was like he was the one picking me up from school. He was the one like just there all the time who I could depend on. And she was a little bit more chaotic and in and out than he was. So when it came to like knowing somebody reliable and just always having a constant presence and that like foundation of who I could count on, it was always him. And he was always the person I called. And I was always worried about my mom leaving me. But then he's the one who did. So that kind of fucked with me because I always thought he would be there. He always was. And when he like left me, which I count as the day that he had his brain surgery, not the day he died, because that changed him completely when he had his brain surgery. It was like our whole family went up in flames, and I really had to get clear on like what do I want for my life. And it was like multiple dark nights situations where like I, because of him, and not for him, but because of him, because of my first baby, and because of all these things, these people who really impacted my life, I made different decisions for me, not for them or because of them, but they came in or out of my life and really like showed me this is a time that you need to really check in with yourself and make some decisions on what you want your life to look like. And I think the best lesson that he taught me, like we spent half our time, we always grew up in, I always grew up in cities, but both my parents are from the country. So I always spent half my time in the country, like really learning about other ways of living, basically. And I want that for my family now too. Like it's not here I'm making this money now to retire and have my second property. It's like no, I want my kids to know that life now. I want to show them this world that is so important to me where he's buried so that I can feel connected to him in like a literal sense more and take that time to be quiet. He always told me like my mom didn't know really how to achieve balance for a long time in her career, and he was always like, I mean, his job was in recreation, so he was like, whatever you choose, just don't burn yourself out on it, don't overwork, always make time for play. And I have both of them in me. Like I'm definitely a workaholic, especially running my own business, but I try to pencil time in to recreate, like even moving to Edmonds. And he used to ride his bike to work. Now I ride my bike to work. Little things
Oh,
like that
that's cool.
where yeah, I feel like I'm really like honoring him and considering like not what he would want for me, but like the things that he did that I really love and didn't think were possible when I was like sitting in the car an hour each way every day. Like I didn't want that, and he showed me that I could have that. Like he rode his bike home for lunch every day, and I was like, "What? That's kind of like who does that?" But now I could do that. I do that. So he's just like I don't know, the I wouldn't say he's like the biggest influence, probably one of the biggest influences on my life, but certainly like the steadiest and the person who really taught me what to look for in my relationships with people and what I want. And I just always knew that he would support me no matter what. I mean, he was the one that he didn't understand Harry Potter. And he was like at Costco in the line, like, I think that my daughter likes Harry Potter and there's all these people here. Like, should I grab you a book? And he did.
What's your dad's name?
Doug.
Doug.
My son is his middle name. He's named after my dad, Oliver Douglas.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing because I know that your dad is so important. I mean,
Yeah.
he's such a
And if I were
guiding.
to like, yeah, if I were to share more, I would get like really emo and I don't want to.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
What would you share? Um, I mean, you talk a lot about quitting corporate. I mean, more than I do for sure. I mean, we both are on the same path, and I think we both. I mean, we've talked about we're doing this podcast together, and I think we both feel like this is just the beginning for us. You and I are meant to do something bigger. We just haven't decided or determined or hasn't come to us what that is yet. But I was saying we both talk about kind of quitting corporate. I left Amazon. You left Gene Res most recently, but all these other. But you have a TikTok account, and you're really good at TikTok. And you talk about like leaving corporate, like little snippets or like business advice. Like, what advice do you have to somebody who is currently sitting in their corporate job right now? It's Thursday at 11:05. They are counting down the hours till they go to lunch, and they have been thinking about leaving, and they just don't know what skills they're going to, what they're going to do on their own. They don't necessarily have the confidence, but it's in the back of their mind. What are you going to tell that person?
I just had this conversation last week, and I think there's a delta, a gap that I'm trying to solve for that I don't know that I have the skills to do for people. And that's you have that thought in the back of your mind, getting from that to my business is launched. I think there's a lot of worthiness work that needs to happen in between, especially for women. And I could go on and on about that. But my advice for them that I told this person over coffee is start cheating on your boyfriend. Like, you don't have to have everything figured out. You don't need the website. You don't need the social media handles. You don't need the branding. That stuff is, like, in my opinion, very much noise and distraction from actually doing the work. So get on Craigslist. Get on, I'm not super pro these freelancing sites, but they are a good way to figure out what you want to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
write
what
up
things people
what
are
would
looking
you,
for.
even if you didn't, yeah, even if you're using them for research purposes, like what would you write for a gig? Like Fiverr's cool that way, where it like says like, I am so and so and I will do this for you. How would you fill in that sentence of like, I will blank? What is that and how much are you going to charge for it? That's really helpful in coming up with your list of services. For me, it's hard because I always knew what I wanted to offer to people. So I didn't have that question. But what I'm finding is a lot of people, they go down, especially in my world, like a more marketing generalist path where they haven't taken stock of what they even like doing or what they want. They know I'm miserable for whatever reason within this environment. And the first step is identifying what's making you miserable. What don't you like there? And what do you like doing in your current job? Even if it's nothing, that counts too. What do you like doing at all that you think could be monetized if you care to be paid for your skills? Um, and most of us are living in worlds where we need to. And many people, they just, their eyes aren't open. There's no awareness there. You're just going down the path. You're driving to work every day. You're getting through the day. But to be conscious and to read some books, think about what motivates you. Think about what you don't like doing. That list for me when I was in my corporate jobs was usually longer than what I did like doing. So it was easier to come up with. That kind of upfront work, not making the website, not creating the email address, none of that is going to matter if you never launch your business because you can't get out of your own way to even figure out like the human design stuff is huge too because it gives you the tools to be like, once I do start talking about my business, how am I going to talk about it in a way that actually brings me money? You can Google all the like how to price yourself stuff. You'll figure that out and like change it along the way too. But just the not this is enough to start something, and you don't have to quit and just hope for the best, but you do need to understand yourself enough to know like this is what I want my schedule to look like. The first goal I had for myself was I am going to make half my salary because that's what I would be making if I also had all these hurdles in my way of the childcare and the getting to the job. So if I can do that in my first year, which I don't necessarily recommend to people because it's like I mean, sure, that's a goal, but like, what does it represent? It doesn't really say much. But for me, that's how I knew like I can do this is if I can make half my salary not doing all the things that would have made me miserable, then I know that I'm on to something. And I made way more than that in my first year. So I always tell them, like, especially for achievers, just start. And you've said that too. It's like, it doesn't need to be in a pretty box. It doesn't need to be presented. I didn't even have a website until like maybe sometime last year. I was getting embarrassed because I didn't have anywhere to send people. I didn't even have an email address for my
I
business
remember
because,
that.
yeah, I was so like in the work, doing the work, that I didn't do any of the admin marketing stuff until I had to. So it doesn't have to like be this pretty plan and this whole launch thing. I mean, it's great if it is, but that's not a reason not to start. And dabbling and thinking of how you would fill in those sentences, it just taking those months to research and sit with yourself and know yourself is huge. And I guess I'm like pretty naturally inclined to that, especially because my mom is like a huge self help person too. But I find that's like the missing thing for a lot of the people who are talking to me of like, I don't even know what I would offer. And I'm like, you have this whole big career and you don't know what you would offer? Like, that's
Right.
sad.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's
that's the
that's
first thing.
that's what I go through a lot when I coach people. Like we talk about what are your skills? Like
Mm-hmm.
what life experiences have you had? Let's talk
Yeah.
about that. So, that's I think this is all really good advice. I think you and I need to do some sort of mastermind together
Yeah.
or like business retreat
And
to
there's
help
a,
people.
I think it's particularly relevant for women. I don't think it's even hardly relevant at all for men, but that's my opinion because we have been conditioned out of, I mean, the corporate world wasn't created for us to begin with. And
Right.
a lot of like what I share on TikTok is just like working out my own traumas of all the like terrible shit that I had to deal with that was like super normalized. And now being out of it and like feeling kind of ragey. And I actually have to like not post a lot of like, wait, this is like another negative TikTok. Like maybe don't put that out there. Um, but it, for women, I'm seeing that like for them to not even consider themselves is the first issue.
Right. Right. We have to realize that, and you're really, really a big advocate for women. Like, you have to realize, like, you're so valuable. Like, you, even if you're a stay at home mom, like, you have the most important job. You're so good at helping me, especially realize, like, you are being a parent is really hard. And,
Mm-hmm.
like, you can do that and have a career successfully. And I think that's like so beautiful what you've done there. Like you integrate your kids into your business retreat. You like bring your kids to business meetings with me. I mean, like I like Oliver a lot.
Yeah, he's
And
sweet.
Bianca. I love your kids and your husband, and I'm so honored to know you and be around you and create with you, and I really adore you. Like I seriously adore you, and I love being around you lights me up.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. I think we can really capitalize on each other's energy, which is
I
good.
agree. I agree. Um, so is there anything else that you feel like you want our audience to know about you before we do rapid fires?
No, I think by now they've heard me ramble a lot about a lot of things, like just generally, and I appreciate anybody who listens and wants to take it in. And I am thinking about, like you were saying, the master class. I'm thinking about maybe in this next year what that's going to look like and how we can create something. And I've been doing some of the research. I'm in the research mode of that, of how do I help more women who want something more than their corporate job
Yep.
actually actualize on that. And the big goal is to topple the patriarchy, but
Yes.
we aren't quite there yet. The more people we have in our fold, the more likely we are to light some fires, burn down the building, like they say in Office Space. So, I mean, check me out on Instagram. I'm at Popa. I'm talking more about that stuff there most frequently, and on TikTok too. I'm at Popa consistently everywhere because consistency is key. And I just appreciate everybody who's here with us and cares to participate in this conversation. And I'd also welcome any thoughts, ideas, feedback on some of the stuff we come up with.
Great. Do you want to try to do rapid fires really quickly?
Yeah, and I'll be rapid.
Okay. Awesome. So, what is your coffee order?
Usually a wet cappuccino, but not at Starbucks. I don't go to Starbucks often, but when I do like their kind of frou-frou drinks as a treat because they donate to Planned Parenthood, and I like that. I learned it on TikTok.
What? Oh, I think everybody knows this answer if they listen to our podcast, but what article of clothing would you wear every day?
Expensive athleisure.
Mm-hmm.
Preferably a matching set.
Okay. I need to buy that because I don't, send me a link or something. I don't own that, so I need to test it out. Um, what is your first happy memory?
I was just talking about that with the busy girls, I think, and it was me being, and I think about it a lot, like me crawling into this little cupboard that we had at our house in Wenatchee before we moved to Olympia. And it was like, and our little Cocker Spaniel following me in the kitchen to this cupboard where I kept all my coloring books and art supplies and stuff. And just the way the light comes into houses in North Central Washington is just, I don't know why I remember that little clip, but I do.
I love it. I love that light plays a piece to that too. That's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is your best business purchase under $100? And as you know, we always say that you can um, cheat on this if you want to.
Probably our microphones for
Mm.
this podcast. I'm really feeling like this podcast is such an awesome fit for us, and I'm so excited that we're doing it. And last year, I don't think it's under $100, but it's about $100, is purchasing my admin system, Bonsai,
Yep.
which I use for invoicing contracts. I don't have to chase money anymore, which has been a huge relief for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, about $20 a month. And I pay it a year in advance to have it be a little bit less.
Got it. And then finally, what is lighting you up lately?
This podcast is lighting me up lately, and thinking about exciting new beginnings of like, I'm really manifesting that secondary property
Mm-hmm.
where I can live a semi retired life now.
I
And
love that.
I mean that in the sense of like having more access to open spaces and being here and there and not feeling like super held down by one thing or one place, and having more access to my family as well and my dad. And also like trying to figure out how to help more women. That's really a passion.
Well, that wraps up our rapid fires. That's that's amazing. I love where's the secondary property?
The town that my grandparents live in that we are looking at is called Waterville, Washington, and it's about 30 minutes from Wenatchee up this really gorgeous winding canyon. It's where my mom grew up. It's a very Norman Rockwell town, and that's where my dad is buried as well. My grandparents have this gorgeous house that they've lived in all of our lives, basically, and They do all these really cool community events. Like they have a crab feed for to support the fair, and all of my uncles, my mom's brothers live there, and a lot of my cousins. So I really want to expose my kids to that area more. And because our cabin in Chelan is basically uninhabitable for a young family, it's only 40 minutes from there. So we can go over to Chelan for the day and hang out at our cabin. And I haven't even been able to go to Chelan for a few years comfortably because I have young kids who would fall off the deck, and it's just this whole thing. So
Oh,
to be able to be like an adult, to like have my own property over there where we're all comfortable, and it's such a cool access point to so much, like our wine clubs in Chelan. We'll have to do like a little retreat there. You'll experience this town. Um, it's just wide open and so beautiful. That's where I was sitting on my dad's grave and just looked up and saw that horse in the pasture just running. And it's one of the few places in the world, like the San Juans too, where I just feel immediately peaceful, and to be able
that's
to
so
give that
important.
contrast, yeah, to myself and my kids, because I'm thinking a lot about like conditioning and the things that we were imprinted on our brains before we even knew it, and what I want to be imprinting on my kids' brains before they know it, in a
Right.
positive way, so that they understand like, oh, this isn't like that Amazon shows up at my door every day with a package isn't necessarily the only reality.
Right. That's my kid's reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the way they talk about it at 4 is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mommy, the truck came and it didn't even bring you anything. I'm like, oh God.
Thankfully, our
Whoops.
neighbors have a much worse Amazon problem than we do, but
Yeah.
it's still like the fact that he knows is troubling.
Yeah. Or like, why don't you just order that on Amazon? It will be here tomorrow. And I'm like,
Yep,
oh my God. What
yep.
have I done? What have I done?
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, yeah, I'm not saying they're going to be churning butter over there, but it's a different reality.
I Googled how to make homemade butter and they said do it in a blender with ice.
Weird.
I know. I was like very mind blown by that. I haven't tried it yet. But anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, Whitney. Talk to me. Wow, you're not talking, well, whatever. To share your story with our
All
audience
of you,
because,
yes.
oh,
Our audience of us.
you're an amazing human and I really love working with you and being around you.
Likewise.
Um, okay, bye. See you.
This episode's music was provided by Sloan Best.
And editing provided by Kayla Shute.